What's going on, everyone? I am TST's the Mudman. This week's Gods Unchained Weekend Ranked event is almost here, so it's time to figure out what we are going to play this week. Let's start things off the way we always do. We're on gudex.com, set to the last 7 days at Mythic rank to the Gods popularity. And as you can see, just like the past couple of weeks, we got Nature in the top spot with about 29% of the meta. Next up, we've got War at 19% of the meta. Then Magic, Death, and Deception all floating around 15%, and Light once again picking up the rear at 9.5% of the meta. Let's see, when you run into your Nature opponent, which you will run into tons this weekend, they're probably going to be mid-range aggressive Nature. War is going to either be very aggressive Slayer or mid-range Control War. Both are really strong. Mid-range Control War is definitely the stronger of the War archetypes. Magic is generally like tempo spell magic, although it's not ridiculous to see something like ramp magic or even portal wrangler magic nowadays. Death's most powerful archetype is definitely board wipe death. Board wipe death's one of the strongest archetypes in the whole game. However, that deck is super expensive, so it's not particularly prevalent. So most of your death opponents will be zombie death. Deception, similar to magic, has multiple archetypes. In my opinion, aggro deception is currently the best deception, but like a mid-range control deception is definitely something you might see, and sleep deception as well. And then light is generally zoo light. However, order light is becoming slightly more popular, so if you happen to run into a light opponent, it might not be zoo, it might be the mid-range order theme. But now that we've talked about the gods in like a general sense, let's jump into some specific deck lists that you might want to play this weekend. Alright, so let's start things off with Nature. This aggressive mid-range Nature deck is the exact same one from last week, made by Dreadnought. A player going by 6 high got 24 out of 25 with this exact list last week, so it definitely works. It's important to note that this deck that Dreadnought made was made just after the Finian Fruitbearer nerf. Originally, Dreadnought had -1 Jagstaff, +1 Finian Fruitbearer, and it just so happens that that exact variant of the deck, so no Jaguar, +1 Fruitbearer, also went 24 out of 25 last weekend. So if you are a big fan of this aggressive mid-range nature, but you love Finian Fruitbearer, don't worry. You can totally still play him and expect lots and lots of wins. Just like we said last week, this deck is just extremely good, lots and lots of good cards. It's extremely proactive in the early game, and it also has comeback mechanics in the late game. Let's go through the deck real quickly. So in the early game, we've got our strong early game creatures. We have Marshwalker, Black Jaguar, Pyramid Warden, Manosian Infiltrator often makes for some really high tempo turns. And we also have the Chiron and Low-Hanging Fruit. Chiron and Low-Hanging Fruit are really great for buffing those aforementioned early game creatures so they can snowball out of control, generating you lots of favor, taking lots of value trades, doing lots of damage, all that good stuff. Then Chiron is particularly good. There are lots of relics in pretty much every god except Deception right now. Lots of those relics have 1 durability, mainly things like Necroscepter. So having Chiron around to destroy your opponent's Necroceptors or your war opponent's like Valka's Captain relics or Leviathan Hunter relics to play around Carnage Sweeps are really, really good in this meta. And if your opponent doesn't have a relic equipped, it's just a decent creature buff in the early game. Let's see, moving down the list, we've got our 2-mana cards in Canopy Barrage, Faithflame Blade, and Underbrush Boar, which are all fantastic for maintaining your board state. Canopy Barrage is obvious, just good removal card. Faithflame Blade also controls the board really well, and it's particularly good against tempo magic, since you can destroy their very sticky Shadow Scryers with it. Underbrush Boar is obvious, he's just a great value trade in the early game. Now we've got the Celestial Stag. This is one of your big value generators. It's a decent creature on its own. We talk about this card pretty much every single week. It's a nature staple. 3/3 is a very decent body in the early game. Blessed is really good for controlling the Sanctum, and since you're an early game deck, you want to be the one controlling the resources in the Sanctum, and then obviously generating more resources every single turn is great when you're a deck that has such a low curve and is trying to spill. Lightning Strike is obvious, great like single target removal, kills Pyramid Wardens, kills big stuff. Selena removes the Confused from all of your confused creatures. It's also difficult to remove with its backline ward, and it has the consistent 2 damage to help maintain board presence. Brazen Moose is big, it costs 5 mana, it's easy. Falling Star we also talk about pretty much every week just because it's a super good card. I always say it's never a bad time to play Falling Star. I think that's just a good way of summarizing it. If you're ahead on the board, it buffs up your board and puts you more ahead. If you're behind, you burn your opponent's biggest creature and you build up your own board. So Falling Star is just always a super powerful card. Jagstaff is, high tempo, high value card. Destroy ideally 2 of your opponent's creatures and generate you 2 creatures for just 1 card. That's a lot of stuff for just one thing, which is good. We've got the Giant Penguin here. He was nerfed last week, but he's still really good. Still has 6 attack, which is very threatening. Still has that immediate impact with its blitz. And the 1 armor is still relevant. He's relatively hard to remove. And then the Hunt is your, big 6-mana board clear. If you lose control of the board, the Hunt gets you back in it. And then we discussed Pyramid Warden and Minosian Infiltrator. Pyramid Warden's obviously the best 2-mana card in the game. He's got a lot of stats. If you own him, you play him. Minosian Infiltrator kills your opposing Pyramid Wardens. It's great for destroying Curse Obelisks. It's great for destroying All-Seeing Spires. Great for opposing Marshwalkers. Minosian Infiltrator usually finds something good to kill, even a Skeleton Heavy. So yeah, if you like playing nature, this is a great list. It's very consistent. I've played with this list a whole bunch of times. The deck just feels really, really smooth. If you are a nature player, then this is definitely the list for you. Alright, now let's move on to Magic. I've got 2 Magic decks for you this week. We've got Tempo Magic as well as Combo Magic. This is the exact same list that we showed off last week. Tomas here was able to get 24 out of 25 wins last weekend, so this deck definitely performs well. So let's jump right into it. The beauty of Tempo Magic is it's really good at being both proactive and reactive. So if you're being proactive, so if you're playing against something like Ramp Magic or Board Wipe Death or like a Control-y War deck and you want to be the aggressor, you've got a lot of high potential early game plays with your Assistant Alchemist with Pyramid Warden, Assistant Alchemist with Shadow Scryers, or even Assistant Alchemist plus Ancient Text so that you can give one of your very powerful 3-mana creatures protected either on turn 2 or 3. Let's see, we've got tons and tons of card draw, which you can use to generate more resources to keep applying pressure. We've got card draw in the form of Demetrios' Giraffes. We've got Palace's Wand, which is probably the best card draw source in the entire deck. You're always looking for Palace's Wand in your mulligans. We've also got Vortmir, who's pretty good for drawing cards, and we have All-Seeing Spire, who is fantastic for drawing cards, in particular against War. War has a really hard time dealing with your order creatures, so All-Seeing Spire often just lives until it runs out of order, which means it's going to draw you tons and tons of cards. If you're playing against Control War, it's going to be really hard to control you when you're generating a bonus card every single turn. So All-Seeing Spire is another excellent card to keep in the mulligan, especially against Control War. A general mulligan tip for this deck is you want one of the card draw engines, preferably Palace's Wand and or All-Seeing Spire, and then Demetrios and Vortmir are like your bottom tier draw engines, but you're almost always looking for Palace's Wand, All-Seeing Spire, and then Assistant Alchemist and something that can pair with Assistant Alchemist for your ideal mulligans. Let's see, let's get back to talking about being proactive. Got a bit of a tangent. We also have some very powerful creatures. Vortmir is able to deal 3 or 4 damage a turn and draw you a card. That can be threatening very quickly. Oni is probably him or your Monolith. Those are your 2 biggest threat creatures. Oni can come down in the early game. If you're playing against any god besides War, it's fairly easy to stick an Oni on turn 2 or 3, especially if you can give him Protected. And Oni will snowball out of control. It'll give all of your other creatures Ward, so you can play around sleep mechanics, as well as just hide them from your opponent's spells. All the while, Oni is getting really, really big and dealing tons and tons of damage. Let's see, Worm Breath obviously trades away a big creature, goes face. Same is true with Epiphany. And then our final big proactive tool is the Monolith of the Storm, which does the majority of the damage in your deck. You have tons and tons of cheap spells with your Ancient Text, your Forms of Powers, even your 2-mana bolts, all juice up Monolith of the Storm's attack value to very, very high amounts, and then you can just dish out tons and tons and tons of damage. At least double-digit damage off the Monolith. It deals a ton. In the neutral slots, we've got the Iron-Tooth Goblin. As I said in the nature segment, there's a lot of relic removal running around. You want to destroy your opposing relics, so Iron-Tooth Goblin is super decent in the meta currently, And Pyramid Warden is Pyramid Warden. If you have Pyramid Wardens, why not run him? He's the best 2-drop. Every deck sees 2 mana. Let's see. If you are in a matchup against something like Aggressive War or Aggressive Nature and you need to be the reactive player, this deck also functions really well being reactive. It has all of your bolts. Star Shard Bolt and Tracking Bolt are both great for dealing with creatures. Like I said when we were talking about Worm Breath can also trade. It's absolutely fine. You've also got Street Conjurer, who is incredibly strong in the nature matchup particularly, but really against all creature-centric matchups, making it so your Tracking Bolts deal 2 damage to everything, making your Forms of Power and your Ancient Text deal 3. This deck is very good at also being defensive. And one thing that you might want to note is like last week, for example, Nature was extremely popular. It was like 35 to like 37% of the meta at some points during the weekend. So if you see that's happening, you might want to tech in something like a Crystal Rain. Last week, Nature was really popular, and they were running a lot of like Blade Flies, as well as the like Falling Stars. So that means they have lots of 2-attack creatures floating around. So Crystal Rain is like a great tech card if you see there's tons of that like aggressive mid-range nature floating around. I personally ran Crystal Rain in my Tempo Magic deck last week. It felt very comfortable. But if you're not seeing a ton of nature, then you definitely don't need the Crystal Rain. It's also good if light is popular, but what kind of fantasy world are we living in where light is popular? Yeah, but that is about it. If you'd like more explanation on Tempo Magic, like I said, this is the exact same list from last week, so check out that video if you'd like more explanation. But yeah, Tempo Magic was good last week. It's going to be good this week. It's an incredibly powerful archetype. And yeah, let's move on to Combo Magic. Alright, so now let's talk about our Combo Magic deck. This deck is usually referred to as Portal Wrangler Magic, as its game plan is to play an entire board full of 0-mana Portal Wranglers, and then beat you with Form of Unity. So, this is an archetype that used to be very popular. Clear Mind got nerfed, the deck stopped seeing play, Clear Mind was recently buffed, and Portal Wrangler deck has been jumping up in popularity. Aura here has played 48 games, they 93.8% win rate. So like I said, the best way to describe this deck is an oppressive meme. Its general strategy revolves around Lost in the Depths. As you can see, 22 of the cards in this deck are 1-mana cards, and that is there so that you can hard mulligan for that Lost in the Depths. Where did it go? There it is. So you hard mulligan for Lost in the Depths, you play a 1-mana creature, or your opponent has a 1-mana creature, you Lost in the Depths one of those 1-mana creatures, you blow up all 22 of your cards, leaving you with just your combo. Your combo, of course, being Portal Wrangler, Clone, Warped Engineer, and then whatever your win condition is. In this case, it's Form of Unity. So the goal is, when you have 4 or more mana, you play your 2 Warped Engineers on your Portal Wranglers, making them 0 mana. Then you clone that 0 mana Portal Wrangler, giving you 2 0 mana Portal Wranglers in your hand. You play the first Portal Wrangler, then you play the second Portal Wrangler, the second 0 mana Portal Wrangler. That second Portal Wrangler will generate you another 0 mana Portal Wrangler, which you can play again until your board is completely full of 3/4s, and you're capable of doing that at least twice, one for each clone, and then the second Portal Wrangler in your deck can facilitate more Portal Wrangler waves. And if your entire, your big board full of 6 3/4s isn't enough to kill your opponent, you can destroy them with your Forms of Unity, which will deal 9 damage each. And as long as you remember to always mulligan for Lost in the Depths, this deck can be really quite consistent. As you can see, pretty much every card that isn't your combo either foresees or draws. Dimension Door draws, Flying Carpet foresees, this foresees, Levitate draws, Seeing Stone foresees and draws, Shadow Scryer foresees. You get the picture. The goal is get the Lost in the Depths, do the combo as fast as possible, and then fill up your board with Portal Wranglers and kill them. This deck is extremely strong against control decks. If your opponent is not actively trying to get you to 0, and they give you those 5 turns to create your combo, then it's going to be very hard for them to beat you. However, if you're playing this deck against an aggro opponent, you are going to be incredibly weak. They're just going to go face very quickly, and they'll probably kill you right around you setting up your combo. So if you are looking at the meta this weekend and you see there's a ton of Control War and Board Wipe Death and Ramp Magic and Sleep Deception, then Portal Wrangler Magic could definitely be the deck for you. Alright, now let's talk about light. our least popular domain, the Ugly Duckling God of Gods Unchained currently. This week is kind of interesting. This is a mid-range Order Light deck. Fenor Witty told me about this deck initially, but apparently Andre was the original creator of this mid-range Order Light deck. Now, as of now, it is to be determined which archetype is better, True Blue Zoo Light or this mid-range Order Light. I personally like this list more than the Zoo list, mainly because you do have a chance if you lose the board state. Like, you don't have great comeback mechanics, but you do sort of have comeback mechanics. Also, this archetype is new and therefore much more fun than the very, played out Zoo Light. So let's jump into this deck and discuss what makes it different than the normal Zoo list, besides, of course, the curve, which you can see is a little bit beefier than your average Zoo list. So, as the name would suggest, Order Light has a lot of Order synergy cards. We've got the Inquisitor Informant for some order, for giving order to your opponent's creatures. We've got the Watchful Hounds, of course, that are great for giving order to your opponents. We've got CERN, who not only draws you a bunch of cards, bolsters your board state, he also orders your opponent's creatures. And then we have the main reason why we're running these order cards in your Archpriest of Parthene. This card not only gives one of your opposing creatures +3 order, but he gets +1/+1 for each point of order on the board. And if you play something like a Watchful Hound the turn before you play your Archpriest, he is going to be absolutely huge. It's not ridiculous for him to have 20+ attack in my experience. He's just really, really, really big, and his power is bolstered by Cadmos, son of Lysander. Lysander's pride and joy here. His ability is he picks one of the 6-mana creatures from your deck, and then whenever he takes damage without dying, he gives that creature +1 armor. So you might be able to get a super giant creature with lots of armor to beat down your opponent. Another big aspect of this Order Light deck is the card Divine Judgment, which not only is just crazy good against cards like All-Seeing Spire or Monolith of the Storms, it combos with any of those aforementioned order cards to simply destroy any opposing creature for 1 mana. Now, it is important to remember, the card says Obliterate, not Destroy, which means it does go through Ward. However, you don't get favor for obliterating one of your opponent's creatures. So if you were thinking you're going to get 3 favor and then buy something from the Sanctum, obliterating will not get you favor, but it does go through Ward, so it is incredibly powerful. Besides that, we have some of the light staple cards in here. We have Highborn Knight because it's obviously super strong. We've got Canonize because it buffs up our creatures and goes, gets great value trades or deals tons of damage to your opponent's face. And obviously we've got Radiant Dawn because Radiant Dawn is Light's single best card. It's incredibly powerful. Even if we don't run a litany of 1-drops like Zoo Light, Radiant Dawn is still super, super strong. Single-handedly beats board wipe death opponents. Not that board wipe death is particularly prevalent, but yeah, Radiant Dawn is obviously super strong. And yeah, like I said in the beginning of this video, the reason why I prefer this over Zoo Light is because it has the ability to lose the board and come back. Mainly because of that order stuff. You can turn off your opponent's creatures for multiple turns, which gives you the ability to stick creatures easier than you could before. And if you can stick creatures, it means you can Radiant Dawn them. It means you can Canonize them. It means that you can control your opponent's board state long enough to play a giant Archpriest. All in all, this is like a very fun new take on Light. If you are a Light player, then I definitely recommend this deck. It's super strong. Also, almost forgot to mention, this runs Lysander's Spear, which is a super strong Light card. It just gets lots and lots of buff value. And seeing as that this deck goes slightly into the later stage of the game, and it doesn't use those early game relics for control, usually you can't run Lysander's Spear because you're running Ritual Rods and Cudgels, and you don't necessarily need the Ritual Rods and Cudgels because you have that order to control the early board state, so you've got room for the Lysander's Spear to buff up your Highborn Knights, your Cadmoses, your Cerns, your Netherborn Binders, what have you, and make them big, big, big threats. So yeah, if you're a Light player and you want to try something new, this is definitely the list for you. Alright, Board Wipe Death is the next archetype to discuss. For the past couple of weeks, I've been showing off like fun variants of Board Wipe Death, with the Triage Necromancers or like Grandmaster's Extreme Mill Board Wipe Death decks. For this week, we're going with Delta N's very standard, normal, old tried and true board wipe death deck. It is incredibly powerful. That being said, as you can see, it costs almost 2 ETH. So although this deck is super strong, you are not going to run into it particularly often. There are not that many people who have, all the cards for this deck. So don't get too worried about, countering it. That being said, if you are running tempo magic or light, surprisingly enough, anything with lots of ward to play around their sleep is good against board wipe death. But like I said, you're not going to see it too often, so don't fret over it too much. But let's go over why this archetype is so powerful. It's great because you've got excellent stall tools. You got your Siren of the Graves, as well as your Canopic Quarters to reactivate the Sirens of the Graves for lots and lots of sleep. We've got the Avas in here, which is great against dealing with any just early creature deck. Ava can single-handedly beat your light opponents. If you're playing against a nature deck that has a particularly low curve, Ava can also just single-handedly stop your nature opponents. We got Sulfuric Rain, which slowly removes your opponent's board as well as helps draw you, all of your control sources that you need. We've got the Fanatic in here. This is a super important card. Always looking for this in your mulligan. It helps get you to your late game really, really quickly. And as you can see, you run lots of 6 and 7 plus mana cards, so you want to get to that late game quickly. We've also got tons of healing in this deck. 2 Just the Nibbles, 2 Flesh Binds. Obviously, we got demos in here. Reap is removal as well as healing. So the deck has excellent sustain. For your inevitable win conditions, we have Khopesh plus a Pakri's Monster. If you are unaware, when a Pakri's Monster goes to your Void, it counts as having 0 attack. So as far as Khopesh is concerned, Pakri's Monster is your weakest creature in the Void. So even if your opponent destroys your Pakri's Monster, Khopesh brings it right back, and you have infinite giant creatures. We also have the Apocalypse Now, as well as End Times, which is why the deck is called Board Wipe Death. It wipes the board many times. Apocalypse Now is easily the most broken card in this deck. It does not matter what your opponent has been doing. They can have a board full of warded, protected, hidden Armor 5 creatures, and Apocalypse Now just says no, destroys all of them. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's incredibly powerful. End Times is not as good at destroying the board as Apocalypse Now, but it's pretty good, and it leaves you with a large creature to threaten your opponent with. Let's see, we've also got Nephru in here. Nephru is one of Death's most powerful cards. If you have 15 or less health, which is relatively easy to do since you're fairly passive in the early game, then you can play Nephru over and over and over again, dealing 3 damage to your opponent's board, continuing to clear it while, pressuring their life total with that 3 damage. And if Nephru ends up hurting you too much to the point where you're, getting scared about your life total, you can obviously heal with those aforementioned Flesh Binds, Just the Nibbles, Reaps, or Demos. Let's see, in the neutral slots, we've got those demos that we talked about. It's a control deck, so the rule is 2 demos. And then we've also got Jason Medea's Muse in here to outvalue any of your opponents. If you're playing against another slow deck, like a Sleep Deception or a Ramp Magic, Jason will outvalue them with lots and lots of legendaries to fill your deck up with. Altogether, this deck is extremely strong. It's very oppressive. It's great at guaranteeing it doesn't die in the early game, and then it just has some of the best late game cards to capitalize on getting to that late game, game state. If you have the cards to play Board Wipe Death, you will definitely get lots and lots of wins with it. So yeah, it should definitely be in consideration for deck you play this weekend. Alright, the next archetype to discuss is Mid-Range Control War. Before this most recent balance patch, this was the strongest archetype in the meta. They then nerfed Adi very slightly, as well as Soul Survivor, and as the week went on, it turns out that this is still one of the strongest archetypes in the game, despite the big Soul Survivor nerf. If you have been living under a rock, 2 weeks ago, Soul Survivor gave a creature +5 strength, now it gives it +3 strength, and then deals that creature's strength total as AoE damage to the entire board. Turns out, Soul Survivor is still incredibly powerful, and just like what we said when this deck was at the absolute top of the meta, it's just good at everything. It can be proactive, it can be reactive, oftentimes just at the exact same time. It's super powerful, has tons of healing. Let's just go through the deck and over how great it is. So, first card in the list is Out of Its Misery. Out of Its Misery is in here because 9 times out of 10, you're going with Valka's Presence God Power. If you're playing against Magic specifically, Slayer God Power is the way to go, because Magic is usually going with Blast Wave. They'll be able to destroy your Valka's Presence creatures very easily. They're also just going to be using their bolts and their removal spells on your creatures every single turn, and you'll find that you'll be floating mana often because they won't be playing creatures as often for you to remove with your spells and creatures, so you'll be able to weave in those Slayer God Powers, as the game goes on, and it'll be way more helpful than Valka's Presence is what I'm getting at for that specific matchup. But let's get back to it. Out of Its Misery is good because of the Valka's Presence. It makes it so it's never a dead card. You can always draw something out of your deck, and many of your creatures have either Protected or Blitz, which are particularly strong for getting buffed. In particular, Orcish Elite, when you get this and it's a 6/9, that's absolutely broken. You can kill 2, Guild Enforcers, 1 Orcish Elite. It's absolutely nuts. Getting big Oddies is incredibly powerful off of the Out of Its Misery. Getting big Pyramid Wardens, obviously, is great off Out of Its Misery. The fact of the matter is, Out of Its Misery is never a dead card, and it is therefore good. Master Tactician is very good for early game board presence. So if you are playing against something like Blood Ritual, or not Blood Ritual, Board Wipe Death, or Ramp Magic, and you want to be proactive, Master Tactician is a nice, strong, hard to kill creature that you can deal damage with, acquire favor with. Adi is very similar. However, Adi has that extra high roll of he might make your Demogorgons or your Herdicusses or your Anuses cheaper to play, which is absolutely game breaking. Let's see, we have Grand Hall, which is one of the shining stars of this deck. This is one of the cards that really facilitates this deck being good at literally everything. If you are ahead on the board and you have lots of relatively weak, maybe 2-attack creatures, this buffs your entire board and puts them behind an annoying front line so they can deal even more damage. If you're behind on the board, it makes it so your existing creatures trade better than they normally would be, as well as healing you back up to potentially full health, so you can get to those powerful 6 and 7 mana turns that you have many powerful 6 and 7 mana cards. So sustain is very important. And then even if it's a situation where you're really behind and all you have is Grand Hall, it's going to be a front line. It's going to destroy 1 or 2 of your opponent's creatures and heal you up to help get you to that 6 or 7 mana slot to win the game. It's really, really powerful no matter where you are. Magic Missile Launcher is just a great relic. It's great for controlling the early board state. Nature is the most popular god. Nature has lots of 3-health creatures. This is great for destroying those. It also has that little afterlife AoE damage and healing, which is very convenient. We got Viking Longship in here. Viking Longship has replaced Archangel Bruiser, now that Archangel Bruiser has had its health nerfed. Viking Longship is a simple one to understand. He's got Blitz, he controls the board state. Every once in a while you can win the game with his flank ability, getting behind like a Poly or some big front line like that. Now we've got one of our main AoE tools in Carnage Sweep. Carnage Sweep is incredibly powerful. It removes your opponent's entire board state, and you can't talk about Carnage Sweep without talking about Leviathan Hunter. Leviathan Hunter's main purpose for being in this deck is to help facilitate your AoE cards. You can play it on 6 mana or 5 mana with a Pip alongside your Carnage Sweep to clear your opponent's entire board. It is incredibly powerful. Orcish Elite, super blitz creature. Don't need to talk about him for very long. This card is crazy powerful. Next we have Anise, who is also super strong, similar to Orcish Elite, but has that recurring Protected, which is great at controlling the board, very powerful, and that continuous protection makes him an excellent target for Soul Survivor. Let's see, we got Herdicus, who's always good for a big tempo swing. When you're going to play this card, he's going to have a ton of attack, 6 health, relatively hard to remove, and he's going to remove an opposing creature, probably a very large creature. So when you play Herdicus, you're definitely going to swing the game into your favor. Soul Survivor, still super strong. If you pair it with something like a Leviathan Hunter, it no longer kills Demo, which is important to note. But if you do pair it with Leviathan Hunter, it deals the same amount of AoE damage as something like Inferno, so it's still nothing to scoff at. And if you combine it with one of your larger creatures, like that Anise or Demogorgon, Nakvi, Adi, anything bigger than 2 attack, then it does destroy demos. It's still a huge AoE removal spell. Soul Survivor is definitely still worth keeping in your deck. Hector, he's easy to wrap your head around. He's got all the keywords, including Twin Strike, Blitz, Protected, and Leech. So when you play him, you destroy 2 of your opponent's creatures, you heal for like 12, It has frontline, so it can't be ignored. It's a huge deal. The last card in the war domain is Strength in Numbers, which is your big value generator. If you're playing against those control decks and you just don't have enough to get over the finish line, then this will fill your hand up with lots and lots of big creatures that you can play to overwhelm your opponent. The neutral slots, we've got the Iron-Tooth Goblin because relic removal is important. This is a control deck. There are a lot of infinite value relics like Necroscepter, Khopesh, Palace's Wand. You can't let your opponents have infinite value stuff against you if you're going to be a control deck, or else you can't control them. So Iron-Tooth Goblin is super good. Talked about the Leviathan Hunter already. This combos with your Carnage Sweep as well as your Soul Survivor, Pyramid Warden. And this is a control deck, so you run 2 demos so you don't lose. Easy enough. If you have the cards for mid-range control war, it's still really, really powerful. You'll get tons of wins over the weekend. This deck is highly recommended. Okay, and the last god to talk about is Deception. This is the same aggro Deception deck we talked about last week. It was made by J-Rock. This deck is just a very consistent, very powerful aggression Deception deck. J-Rock himself has played 92 games with an 89% win rate. The world at large played 371 games with a 68% win rate. So as far as Deception decks are concerned, this has an extremely high win rate. I've played a couple of games with this deck. It feels very smooth. It's very strong. Let's jump into the list a bit, talk about why it's so good. So we've got lots of great early game creatures. We've got the Pyramid Wardens, the Skeleton Heavies, Switch Duelist, Armor Lurkers, and Shackled Acolytes for strong, high early game tempo plays. All of those creatures can be buffed with Dark Knives for some devastating damage in the early game. We've got Makeshift Shiv in here, which is great for acquiring favor as well as dealing with your opponent's early game weak creatures. Orfeo is a cool card. He's free 1/1 with Deadly's always great. He's also particularly good against Nature. Not only does he go wide to make Canopy Barrages more likely to miss, but Nature is always playing big 3/3s in the early game, and Orfeo can just single-handedly destroy them. And then this deck is also pretty good at acquiring value for such an early curve deck. We've got 2 Patient Pickpockets, which not only generate you a card, the card it generates is from your opponent's hand, so it gives you some insight on what's going on with your opponent. And then we've also got the Hollow in here. The Hollow generates you tons of resources, at least 1 guild creature every single turn, and if you can play him while you have something like Shackled Acolyte or Patient Pickpocket on the field, then you will be generating lots and lots of guild creatures, so you can continue to just spill whatever you have and overwhelm your opponent. We've also got some pretty good control cards in here. We've got Piercing Bolt. We've learned from Magic that 1-mana spells that deal 2 damage are pretty powerful. Removing Armor is also good if you end up playing against one of those wacky aspect of the Pangolin decks, and this card is absolutely game-winning. It's also just good against Guild Enforcers, which are fairly common, or Pangolins, which are very common. Nature being the most popular god, and Pangolin being a 2-of in pretty much every single Nature deck. And if you're not playing against those armor-having gods, then, 1 mana, 2 damage, pretty good. We've got Hunting Trap in here, which is great for controlling the board state. Also very good against Nature, which is very popular. Really good at destroying overgrown rhinos. It kills Finian Fruit Bearers now. It kills any of their many 3/3s. Just a decent card in general. We've got 2 of Ludia's Dedicants in here. This is a great tempo and value creature. Just like something like Miraculous Familiar or Celestial Stag, 3-mana 3/3s with Blessed are very, very solid. It's great to have that Blessed mechanic in the early game. Since we're an aggro deck, we want to be picking that best card in the Sanctum, and the Blessed mechanic is going to help us do that. It also generates you a resource every time you use your God Power, which is Orfeo's Distraction. Orfeo's Distraction is good for protecting your own creatures or for destroying your opponent's creatures. So it's the type of God Power that you don't feel upset about using. So Ludia's Decadent is super strong. We've got the Uncanny Rogue in here, which is really good for dealing with your opponent's big creatures. If they play a big frontline, Uncanny Rogue can make one of your little guys destroy them. Fills a similar niche as Lady Marcella. Then we've got Lantern-Bound Fae, which is also a very powerful order card. Its roar effect is deal 3 damage to whatever source you want. When a creature loses order, including this one, it goes back to your hand and its mana cost is reduced by 1. If you have the hollow on the board, it is very easy to manufacture situations where you're always bouncing your lantern-bound Fae back to your hand and dealing that 3 damage over and over again, which is quite powerful. Let's see, Guild Enforcer is worth mentioning. Not only is he just a decent creature, Guild Enforcer sees lots of play because he's very good. Guild Enforcer is 1 armor, makes it so you can use your Orpheo's Distraction God Power on him every single turn. So you can use him to go face and deal lots of damage, which means he's very powerful in combination with Dark Knives, so you can turn him into a 6/5 with armor 1 that you can hide every single turn and deal lots of damage with. Essentially speaking, this deck is very fast, very strong. If you like Deception, if you want to finish your weekend run quickly, then this is definitely a strong deck for you. Okay, so now that we've looked at all the decks, we've talked about the meta, what is the conclusion? What's the best deck to run this weekend for maximum results in the weekend ranked event? Well, in my opinion, you can either go with mid-range control nature, tempo magic, or mid-range control war. All 3 archetypes are super strong. Obviously, mid-range control war is much more expensive than tempo magic or nature. All 3 of them are super strong. Each of these archetypes went 24 out of 25 last weekend. So no matter what you go with, they're all super strong. They're all very fun decks, but whatever deck you pick, make sure you have fun. Tell us how you did in the TST Discord, and have a wonderful day. Hey, you! Did you know that subscribing to the TST YouTube channel will increase your win rate by 6.9%? So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications. And while you're at it, equip Scythe of the Harvest and attack the like button directly in the face. Bye-bye!